My name is Linda, and I am 31 years old. My husband Howard is 35. Together, we have a wonderful little boy who fills our home with laughter. At the time this story began, I was also expecting our second child. Pregnancy made me feel tired almost every day, but the thought of meeting our new baby kept me hopeful. Howard is a gentle and caring man. Although we came from different countries, we had built a happy life together. He grew up in Europe, while I was born and raised in another country far away. After our wedding, he decided to stay with me in my homeland. We lived there for several years, and in the beginning, everything seemed perfect. Life was simple. We didn't have much money, but we had enough to get by. We enjoyed small moments together, shared meals, and dreamed about our future. Those memories still make me smile. Unfortunately, things slowly became more difficult. Prices kept rising every month. Food became expensive, rent increased, and every bill felt heavier than the last. We started worrying about money all the time. Howard worked hard, but it never seemed enough. He tried his best not to let me see his stress. Whenever I asked if everything was okay, he would smile and tell me not to worry. But I knew him too well. I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. One evening, after putting our son to bed, we sat quietly in the kitchen. The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock. Howard finally spoke. "Linda," he said softly, "I've been thinking about something." I looked at him. "What is it?" He took a deep breath before answering. "Maybe it's time for us to move." My heart immediately felt heavy. "Move?" I asked. "Where?" "Back to my country." I stared at him without saying a word. "My parents are there," he continued. "My brothers and sisters are there too. Jobs pay better and life is easier. We could give our children a better future." I looked down at my hands. Leaving my country had never crossed my mind. Everything I knew was here, my family, my friends, my memories, and the places that made me feel safe. "I don't know," I whispered. Howard reached across the table and gently held my hand. "We'll face everything together," he said. "I promise." His voice was calm, and I wanted to believe every word. For days, I thought about nothing else. Sometimes I imagined a better life. Other times I imagined feeling completely alone in a country that wasn't mine. Eventually, after many conversations and careful planning, we made our decision. We would move. Packing our home was one of the hardest things I had ever done. Every box reminded me of the life we were leaving behind. I hugged my parents tightly before saying goodbye. My friends wished us luck, but many of them cried with me. The airport felt colder than usual. As the plane lifted into the sky, I looked out of the window while tears quietly rolled down my face. Howard wrapped his arm around my shoulders. "It'll be okay," he whispered. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure. The flight felt endless. Being pregnant made every hour feel twice as long. By the time we landed, my body was sore, and all I wanted was to sleep. Howard, however, looked excited. He smiled the moment we stepped outside. "This is home," he said proudly. Seeing his happiness made me smile too. Maybe this really could become our new beginning. During the first few days, we settled into the small house Howard had bought before our move. It wasn't luxurious, but it was comfortable. Our son loved running around the garden, and watching him laugh gave me hope that maybe we had made the right decision. The following day, Howard announced that it was time to visit his family. The moment he said those words, butterflies filled my stomach. I had only met them once before, on our wedding day. Back then, everyone had smiled warmly, congratulated us, and welcomed me into the family. But weddings are special occasions. People often hide their true feelings behind polite smiles. I wasn't sure what everyday life with them would be like. Howard noticed my nervous expression. "It's going to be fine," he assured me. I forced a smile. "I hope so." Soon we arrived at his parents' house. Howard rang the doorbell. A few seconds later, the door opened. His mother stood there with a wide smile. "Oh," she said happily. "Come in. We've been waiting for you." She hugged Howard before looking at me. "Welcome." "Thank you," I replied politely. Inside, the house was full of people. Brothers, sisters, cousins, and relatives I had never met before filled every room. Everyone spoke loudly and laughed together. As soon as they noticed our son, they surrounded him. "Oh, look at him! He's grown so much!" Someone gently touched his hair. Another relative picked him up and kissed his cheek. They all spoke in their own language. Howard smiled proudly while introducing everyone. What nobody knew was that I understood every single word they were saying. Years before meeting Howard, I had studied his language because I had always been interested in different cultures. Over time, I became fluent, but for some reason, I never told his family. Perhaps I was shy. Perhaps I simply enjoyed listening more than talking. Or maybe, deep inside, I wanted to know what people said when they believed I couldn't understand them. So I stayed quiet. Whenever they spoke their language, I simply smiled as if I had no idea what was being said. At first, everything seemed pleasant. We sat together around the large dining table. The food smelled wonderful. People asked me simple questions, and Howard translated whenever necessary. Everything felt normal. Until I heard a quiet voice. It came from the other side of the table. "She looks different," another woman answered. "Yes, especially her hair." Someone else laughed softly. "And those clothes." I froze for a moment. They thought I couldn't understand them. I slowly continued eating, pretending I hadn't heard anything. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe they weren't talking about me. I tried convincing myself that I had imagined it. When we finally returned home that evening, Howard looked happy. "So," he asked, "what did you think?" I smiled gently. "They're very lively," he laughed. "That's my family." I didn't say anything else. I kept those words buried inside me. I hoped they would be the last unkind comments I would ever hear. Sadly, I was completely wrong. The weeks that followed settled into a routine. Howard worked during the day while I stayed home with our son and prepared for the arrival of our baby. We visited his parents almost every weekend. On the outside, everything looked peaceful. Inside, however, I was carrying a secret. Every visit, I heard more comments that they believed I could never understand. At first, the remarks were small. She dresses strangely. I don't think those colors suit her. Howard could have married someone more elegant. Each sentence felt like a tiny cut. None of them were enough to start an argument, but together they slowly wore me down. Whenever someone looked at me, I smiled politely. Whenever they spoke directly to me, I answered kindly. But the moment they turned back to their own language, the criticism returned. I wondered why they disliked me. I had never been rude. I always helped clear the table after dinner. I brought gifts whenever we visited. I thanked them for every meal. Still, nothing seemed to change their opinion of me. One afternoon, things became even worse. I was sitting in the living room while everyone talked around me. My pregnancy had reached the point where my stomach was impossible to hide. I shifted carefully in my chair, trying to get comfortable. That's when I heard Howard's aunt whisper to his mother, "She's getting much bigger." His mother gave a quiet laugh. "Much bigger." Another woman joined the conversation. "Too big." They all chuckled softly. My hands instinctively rested on my stomach. Of course I was bigger. I was carrying their grandchild. Yet they weren't speaking with kindness or concern. They were making fun of my body. I lowered my eyes and blinked several times to stop the tears from falling. I wanted to leave immediately. Instead, I stayed where I was. I refused to let them see that their words had hurt me. That evening, after we returned home, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. I looked at my reflection for a long time. My hair, my clothes, my swollen face, my growing belly. Everything they had criticized stared back at me. For the first time in years, I didn't like what I saw. I quietly wiped away a tear before Howard walked into the room. "You okay?" he asked. I quickly forced a smile. "Just tired." He kissed my forehead. "Get some rest." I nodded. I hated lying to him, but I didn't want to put him in the middle of a fight between me and his family. Days turned into weeks. The comments continued. Sometimes they laughed about my makeup. Sometimes they joked about my accent when I spoke their language very slowly on purpose. Sometimes they simply stared before whispering to each other. Every visit became harder than the last. I started inventing excuses to stay home. "I'm not feeling well." "The baby is making me tired." "I have a headache." Most of the time, those excuses were partly true. Pregnancy was exhausting, but the real reason was simple. I no longer wanted to hear people criticize me while smiling at my face. Howard noticed the change. "You don't seem excited about visiting my parents anymore," he said one evening. "I'm just tired." "You've been saying that for weeks." "I am tired." He looked at me for a moment, then simply nodded. He trusted me. That made me feel even worse. A few days later, I was preparing dinner. I was chopping vegetables while thinking about everything that had happened over the past months. The voices from his family's house echoed inside my head. "Too fat, strange clothes. She doesn't belong here." My thoughts became so overwhelming that I lost my concentration. The knife slipped. A sharp pain shot through my finger. I looked down. Blood slowly ran across the cutting board. For a second, I simply stared at it. Then all the emotions I had been holding inside finally escaped. I burst into tears, not because of the cut, because I couldn't carry the pain anymore. Howard rushed into the kitchen the moment he heard me crying. "Linda!" He grabbed a towel and wrapped it around my finger. "What happened?" I shook my head. "I can't do this anymore," he frowned. "What do you mean?" I tried to speak, but another wave of tears interrupted me. They keep talking about me." His expression became confused. "Who?" "Your family." He looked genuinely surprised. "What are you talking about?" "They insult me every time we visit." Howard slowly shook his head. "No, they wouldn't do that." I took a deep breath. "They speak in your language because they think I don't understand." He stared at me in complete silence. "You understand our language?" I nodded. "I've understood it for years." His eyes grew wide. "You never told me." "I never thought it mattered." He pulled out a chair and sat beside me. "What exactly have they been saying?" For the first time, I told him everything. I repeated every cruel remark, every joke, every insult, every comment about my appearance, my clothes, and even my pregnancy. Howard listened without interrupting. The more I spoke, the more his expression changed. His surprise slowly became anger. When I finally finished, he rubbed his face with both hands. "I can't believe this." "I didn't want to tell you." "Why not?" "I didn't want you to feel like you had to choose between me and your family." He immediately reached for my hand. "Linda," I looked at him. "You are my family." Those 4 words nearly made me cry again. "I should have noticed something was wrong," he continued. "I'm sorry. It's not your fault." "It is partly my fault," he insisted. "I kept telling you everything would be fine without asking how you really felt." I squeezed his hand. "You were trying to help." He stood up. "I'm talking to them." I quickly shook my head. "You don't have to." "I do. I don't want another fight." "There isn't one yet," he replied calmly. "But there will be if they keep treating my wife like this." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. I could hear the determination in every word. For the first time since arriving in this country, I didn't feel alone anymore. The next time we visited Howard's family, I felt nervous the entire drive. Neither of us said much. Howard kept both hands on the steering wheel, his face calm but serious. I could tell he had already decided what he was going to do if anyone crossed the line again. I rested one hand on my growing belly and watched the houses pass by through the window. "Are you okay?" Howard asked softly. I gave him a small smile. "I'll be fine." He reached over and gently squeezed my hand. "You don't have to pretend anymore." His words comforted me. For months I had hidden my feelings. I had smiled when I wanted to cry and stayed silent when I wanted to speak. Now, at least one person knew the truth. When we arrived, Howard's mother greeted us at the door with the same cheerful smile she always wore. "Come in," she said warmly. The house was already full of relatives. Everyone welcomed us politely. His father shook Howard's hand. His sisters smiled at me. His mother hugged our little boy before leading everyone toward the dining room. At first, everything felt different. No whispered comments. No quiet laughter, no judging looks. Everyone carefully chose their words whenever they spoke. Howard occasionally glanced at me as if asking silently, "Did you hear anything?" I simply shook my head. For the first time since moving to this country, I actually relaxed during one of our family visits. Weeks turned into months. Every visit remained peaceful. Howard had clearly spoken to them. Whether they felt guilty or simply became more careful, I didn't know. His mother even surprised me one afternoon. She looked at me and smiled. "That dress looks very nice on you." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. "Thank you," I finally said. The compliment sounded strange after everything I had heard before, but I accepted it anyway. Maybe things really were changing. I wanted to believe they were. As my pregnancy progressed, daily life became more difficult. Walking made my back ache. Sleeping became almost impossible. Even simple chores left me exhausted. Howard did everything he could to help. He cooked dinner more often. He cleaned the house. He played with our son so I could rest. Whenever I apologized for not being able to do more, he smiled. "You're growing our daughter," he would say. "That's already enough." His kindness reminded me why I had fallen in love with him. Then, one rainy evening, everything happened at once. A sharp pain spread across my stomach. At first, I thought it was just another false alarm. But the pain returned only minutes later. Stronger. Howard looked at me with concern. "Linda." I nodded. "It's time." Within minutes, we were on our way to the hospital. The drive felt endless. Every contraction came closer together. Howard never let go of my hand. "You can do this," he kept saying. Several hours later, our daughter finally entered the world. The moment I heard her cry, every painful memory disappeared. The nurse carefully placed the tiny baby into my arms. She was perfect. Howard looked down at her with tears in his eyes. "She's beautiful," he whispered. I smiled through my own tears. "We'll call her Emma." Howard smiled immediately. "Emma." He repeated the name slowly. "I love it." The name meant everything to me. For generations, the women in my family had carried the name Emma as either their first or middle name. My grandmother had it. My mother had it. Now my daughter would carry that tradition too. It made me feel connected to the women who came before me. For the first few weeks after Emma's birth, life felt peaceful. Our son loved being a big brother. Howard couldn't stop smiling every time he looked at his daughter. The house was often messy, and none of us got much sleep, but we were happy. Then Howard's family learned the baby's name. Their reaction surprised me. His sister frowned. "Emma?" His mother exchanged a quick look with another relative. "That's an unusual choice," another family member added quietly. "It has a strange meaning." I looked at them, confused. "It's a family name," I explained. "It has been passed down for generations." His mother simply shrugged. "We would have chosen something else." The room became awkwardly silent. I realized they weren't criticizing the name itself. They were criticizing my choice. Once again, the happiness I had felt began to fade. Over the following weeks, I stayed home more often. Recovering from childbirth took time. Caring for two young children left me exhausted. To be honest, I also needed a break from Howard's family. Their opinions no longer hurt as much as before, but they still drained me. One evening, Howard sat beside me on the couch. My mother's birthday is next weekend. I looked up. They want all of us to come. I remained silent. I know you're worried, he continued, but I really think things have changed. I looked toward Emma, who was sleeping peacefully in her crib. What if they haven't? Howard gently took my hand. I'll be with you. Those words were enough. After thinking about it for several days, I finally agreed. It'll only be a short visit, I said. Howard smiled. Thank you. The birthday arrived sooner than I expected. That afternoon, I packed the baby bag carefully. Extra diapers, bottles, blankets, a change of clothes. Howard carried everything to the car while I carefully placed Emma into her car seat. Our son happily skipped beside us, excited to see his cousins again. As we drove toward his parents' house, I felt the same nervous feeling return. I couldn't explain why. Everything had been peaceful for months. Still, something didn't feel right. When we arrived, music floated out through the open windows. The house was filled with guests, family members, friends, neighbors, people I had never met before. The moment we stepped inside, everyone noticed Emma. Oh, the baby! She's adorable! Can I hold her? Several people walked toward us at once. Instinctively, I held Emma a little closer. I'm sorry, I said politely. You can look at her, but I'd rather not have anyone hold her today. One woman smiled, just for a minute. I gently shook my head. Not today. Howard stood beside me without saying a word. His quiet support meant everything. Some people looked disappointed, but no one argued. We eventually sat down around the large dining table. The conversations continued. People laughed. Children ran through the house. For a while, everything seemed normal. Then I heard two familiar voices. Howard's sister leaned toward their mother. They believed I couldn't understand them. His sister whispered, Linda always acts like she's special. Their mother nodded. She thinks she's better than everyone. His sister looked in my direction. Now she won't even let anyone hold the baby. Their mother rolled her eyes. So dramatic. His sister laughed quietly. I've never liked her. She paused before adding, she's fat now. Both women laughed, and honestly, the sister continued, she's become ugly. Their mother didn't stop her. Instead, she smiled. She looks like she doesn't care about herself anymore. The words struck me harder than ever before, not because they were new, because I had finally reached my limit. I slowly looked down at Emma sleeping peacefully in my arms. Then I looked across the table. Months of silence, months of pretending, months of swallowing my pain. It all ended in that moment. I carefully stood up. The conversations around the room slowly stopped. Everyone looked at me. I took a deep breath. This time, I wasn't going to stay silent. The room slowly became quiet as I stood up. Every conversation stopped. Every pair of eyes turned toward me. Howard looked at me with concern, but he didn't interrupt. He knew I had reached my limit. I took a slow breath while holding Emma close against my chest. Then I looked directly at Howard's sister. "I understand everything you say," I said calmly. For a second, nobody moved. His sister blinked. "What? I understand your language," I repeated. "I always have." The color drained from her face. I turned toward Howard's mother. "From the very first day I came into this family, I heard every comment you made about me." The room remained completely silent. You laughed about my hair. You criticized my clothes. You made jokes about my makeup. You called me too fat while I was carrying your granddaughter. I paused for a moment. I stayed quiet because I hoped things would get better. I looked around the room. I believed kindness would change your opinion of me. My voice became stronger. But today you crossed the line. I looked back at Howard's sister. You called me ugly. Then I looked at his mother, and you agreed. My eyes filled with tears, but this time I refused to hide them. I am not just some stranger sitting at your table. I am your son's wife. I am the mother of your grandchildren. I left my own country, my family, and my entire life to build a future with Howard. I tried every single day to respect all of you. So why couldn't you show me the same respect? The silence became almost painful. Nobody knew what to say. Several relatives looked down at their plates. Others exchanged uncomfortable glances. Then Howard's sister suddenly stood up. "You embarrassed us," she shouted. I looked at her calmly. "No. You embarrassed yourselves." She folded her arms. "If you understood everything, why didn't you say something months ago?" "Because I wanted peace. I thought maybe one day you would accept me. I wanted my children to grow up surrounded by family." I slowly shook my head. But respect cannot exist when only one side is trying. Howard's mother stood up next. "She's lying." The words came out quickly. "She's trying to make us look bad in front of everyone." I looked directly into her eyes. "I don't need to make you look bad. You did that yourselves." Several guests quietly looked away. An older relative spoke softly. "Did you really say those things?" Nobody answered. Howard finally stood beside me. His face was calm, but there was disappointment in his eyes. "My wife is telling the truth." His words echoed through the room. His mother looked shocked. "Howard?" He raised his hand gently. "No." For months, Linda stayed silent because she didn't want to create problems. He looked around at everyone. She protected this family far more than this family protected her. Nobody spoke. Howard continued. "I asked her why she never told me. She said she didn't want me to choose between my wife and my family." He paused, but there was never a choice. He reached for my hand. "Linda is my family." Hearing those words made tears roll down my cheeks. For the first time since moving here, I felt completely supported. Howard looked at his mother. "I expected better from all of you." His mother tried to interrupt. "We were only joking." Howard shook his head. "Jokes are supposed to make people laugh. You made my wife cry." His sister rolled her eyes. "She's too sensitive." Howard looked directly at her. "No." "You were cruel." The room fell silent again. Nobody defended them anymore. I looked down at Emma. She was still asleep, completely unaware of everything happening around her. My son quietly walked over and held my free hand. His small fingers wrapped around mine. At that moment, I realized something. These two children were my responsibility. I wanted them to grow up surrounded by kindness, not gossip, not insults, not people who smiled to your face and spoke badly behind your back. I looked at Howard. I think it's time to go. He nodded immediately. I agree. His mother hurried toward the door. If you leave now, she said angrily, don't bother coming back. The room became quiet once again. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I answered with a calm voice. If respecting myself means I can't come back, then goodbye. Howard picked up the baby bag. Our son slipped his little hand into mine. Together we walked toward the front door. Nobody stopped us. Nobody apologized. Nobody even said goodbye. The door closed softly behind us. The cool evening air felt refreshing after everything that had happened inside. We slowly walked to the car. Before getting in, Howard turned toward me. I'm sorry. I looked at him. For what? For not seeing the truth sooner. I should have noticed. I should have protected you. I gently smiled. You protected me today. He lowered his head. I promise you something. What? Nobody will ever make you feel alone again. I reached over and hugged him. I believe you. When we arrived home, everything felt peaceful. I carefully placed Emma in her crib. She stretched a little before falling asleep again. Our son was already tired from the long evening. After tucking him into bed, Howard and I finally sat together on the couch. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. The house was completely quiet. Finally, I let out a long breath. I never imagined I would actually say those words. Howard smiled softly. I'm glad you did. So am I. The following days were strangely silent. No phone calls, no text messages, no surprise visits. Part of me kept expecting someone to reach out. Maybe an apology, maybe an explanation. But nothing came. At first, the silence felt sad. Then, little by little, it became peaceful. Without the constant criticism, I found myself smiling more often. I laughed with my children. I enjoyed simple family dinners. I stopped worrying about what other people thought of my appearance. One evening, while Emma slept peacefully and our son played in the living room, I stood in front of the bedroom mirror. For months, I had looked into that mirror, searching for flaws. This time, I saw something different. I saw a woman who had moved across the world for love, a mother who had carried two beautiful children, a wife who had stood beside her husband through every challenge. Most importantly, I saw someone who had finally found her voice. Howard walked into the room and stood beside me. He wrapped one arm gently around my shoulders. You look happy, he said. I smiled at my reflection. I think I am. You've always been strong. I shook my head. No. I was just afraid. He looked at me. What changed? I thought about the answer for a moment. Then I smiled. I realized that staying silent doesn't always keep the peace. Sometimes it only teaches people that it's okay to hurt you. Howard nodded. And speaking up? I looked at him. Speaking up reminded me that I deserve respect. He kissed my forehead. And you always will. I smiled as I looked at our family. Life wasn't perfect, There were still challenges ahead, but one thing had changed forever. I would never again stay silent just to make other people comfortable. Sometimes finding your voice is the hardest thing you'll ever do. But once you find it, you never want to lose it again.